Hi, this is Carl Palchuk. Welcome once again to the SMB Community Podcast. I'm joined today by Rob Boles from Blokworx with an X. So, welcome, sir. So you are, I guess, you define yourself as an MSSP. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah,
right.
that's it. And thank you for getting that X because in a Web 2.0 world, figuring out how to letter and spell a company, we get butchered pretty good on the spelling side. So
well, I can tell you that before the internet, Palachuk was a curse, and now it's a blessing. So,
right on.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks. So my background is I've kind of always been around technology and communications. My father was a communications officer on B-17s in World War II, and on some level handed off the knack to me, if you will, as the techies will sometimes laugh at each other. Yeah, you got the knack. So I've been around communications, installing old UHF, VHF antennas on roofs way long ago, longer than I care to admit. From there, transitioned to satellites, and ultimately, when computers kind of evolved and came around, I was working at a company and kind of became the in-house default techie guy because I could figure it out, and got tired of doing what I was doing and started working in technology full time with Pacific Bell, and the majority of my career has been around security and complex wide area networks and data centers. So at some point, there was a transition from that existence to something maybe more small business and user friendly, and in the business we created around Blokworx. And the premise of Blokworx was when you don't cut corners and you use the right equipment and do it right the first time, it's scalable, it's modular, and it just works. So
that's amazing. Yeah. So you were an MSP.
Yeah, the labels are interesting, right? Because we've got
or a VAR,
right, bar integrator. I think of us as we solve challenges, and if I was really specific, we defend our clients against cybercrime and financial loss. But in channel terms, like I know you're aware of, because I know you've got a lot of fans out there, myself included, who followed your cookbook. When I started the business, like most, it was interesting coming from an enterprise space down to the small and mid-sized or medium-sized space, because in the early days, I think we all scratch, kick, fight to build business, to grow revenue, so we can build processes and those things and evolve. And so with a focus on WAN and complex security, and then dealing with 25 computers, I had to go out and find guys to help me with that. So we got off track a little bit. I got distracted. I call it the accidental MSP, because suddenly we were doing MSP work. But in 2015, there were some transitions with the business. And as I sat back and spread the tea leaves out and said, okay, where am I going to go with this? Decided to refocus on security. And at that point, by technical terms, we returned or became an MSSP. And my guys joke because they don't like to work on things that users touch. So,
so does that mean you work on routers and firewalls, but you don't work on desktops and laptops? Like, what exactly do you do? Like, if I'm going to hire you, what are you going to do?
Well, what do we do? That's a great question. So our core focus is infrastructure. So router, switch, firewall. In today's terms, it's really next generation firewalls. So the traditional days of port and protocol have really been replaced by user and application. So we spend a lot of time hardening environments and delivering security services predominantly at the edge. We've expanded to the endpoint just out of necessity. in a zero trust world with resources, whether they're hybrid, cloud, premise, really anywhere at this point. We kind of had some events evolve that forced us to address that piece, and in doing so, we became a full-fledged managed security service provider.
So do you help people to be compliant with the various, whatever, HIPAA or GDPR or whatever that's out there?
Yeah, NIST, pick one. We can acronym ourselves a full 30 minutes, I think. But the short answer is yes. And if I really boil it down, we kind of address things on two levels. You're going to have clients who just require security because they understand the risk, they've felt the heat, they've been burned. And then you're going to have clients who need security because of a compliance-driven existence. So whether that's DoD subcontractors or banking or PCI or FINRA, each of these has its own set of requirements. And so the short answer is yes. And what we've found is we can easily facilitate the technical requirements of these things. We've got all that in process. We can generate reports. A good amount of that is automated. But typically, what we really see when we get into that, and especially with some of the NIST compliant stuff that came up for the DoD guys this last year, is a shortage of documentation. So, that's a piece where we partner with, because my guys are the gearheads. They're not the authors. And it's a learning process for the client to understand that you don't just get compliant by putting, X, Y, and Z equipment in that you've neglected for the last 5 years. There's actually documentation, process, procedure you need to fulfill.
Well, and some of them, like HIPAA, if you don't document it, it doesn't matter. You are not compliant until the documentation is done. Like, a lot of people don't get that. You can set up everything perfectly, but if you're not documenting it, then you got nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and then you open up a whole different set of conversations, right? Because if you document it and you say that your hard drive destruction process is to drill the drive at 12 noon on each drive, but one of them's at 3 o'clock instead of noon, you're out of compliance because you're not. It sounds silly, but you're literally out of compliance because you're not following your documented process.
Right. Well, and it can be as simple as, like I'm just putting together a GDPR document that says, I'm going to do this webinar. I'm going to have all the registrations. I'm going to download it to my computer. I'm going to transfer it to you, and then I'm going to delete it from my computer. If I don't do all that, I'm not in compliance. So you have to be careful what you say you're going to do. Yeah. But you have to say enough to actually be in compliance. So do you deal with insurance companies at all?
We, in our existing client base, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, banking, I don't believe we have any direct insurance clients, but I know we have clients who have subsidiaries.
I don't mean dealing with the insurance directly, but following their audits to make sure that people have the security that they need for their insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing with a lot of the cyber insurance is that there is an actual benefit for some clients to have and to actually take the necessary steps to provide the security versus just having a policy per se and saying have it. So, which is good.
My friend Josh Lieberman was saying that, a lot of people, they say, they fill out the paperwork and they go, yeah, I'm doing all this. Check, 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 check. I have insurance. I'm like, you have insurance that's never going to pay off if you don't actually do all that stuff.
Right. Well, it's interesting. One of our qualifying questions when we very first engage with partners and clients is, are you looking to check a box, or are you authentically seeking to secure an environment? Because at a very raw level, the answer to that really dictates what the relationship is going to look like. Because what we've found is if you just simply want to check a box, we're probably not a good fit. Call it integrity, call it completeness of vision. We could label it what we want, but the reality is at the end of the day, after doing this for 20 years, I can pretty much identify that if the person's not truly committed to securing the environment and they just want to check that off, it's just a huge red flag of future issues. And if they just want to check it off, what they're really saying is, my box is checked, I'm moving the responsibility from me to you, and if something happens,
right.
Do
and
the
how
math.
much
So
liability do you actually have? Like if you say that you've secured my environment, are you out of the woods?
That's a really interesting question, because I was having a conversation with another entity this morning around this, and no one in security will ever 100% say they can secure an environment. And why is that? Well, there's too many variables. I can absolutely harden your threat surface and minimize your exposure and give you cybersecurity awareness training, and we can really provide the full suite of services. But if you came into work this morning and in the parking lot there was a USB drive that as you stepped out of your car you thought looked interesting, and for some reason you missed that lesson or didn't hear us talk about this and thought it'd be a good idea to plug it in and see what's on it, I can't account for that. So right. What we have is proven documented processes. We've created our own homebrew, if you will. It's a combination of NIST and SANS and partner best practices. And then we have a validation component. So we really run through it and vet that we do what we're saying. But at the end of the day, I can, put you in a padded suit in a padded room. But if you want to find a way to hurt yourself, people can be creative, and we can't account for that. So fortunately, from a legality perspective, we haven't had to address that yet. I'm under no illusion that won't happen someday. But I think that my business experience has been that by being consistent in our delivery and being consistent with the products we choose to work with, and being consistent in our relationships with our partners and clients, that hopefully we can avoid that. But there's no doubt in my mind it's kind of like a breach. It's no longer that it's never going to happen. It's that when it happens, have a plan for it. So,
well, two things. First of all, when you're protecting something, it's the standard thing. You have to protect everything. The bad guys only have to find the one hole that they're that they're beating against. The other thing is, it struck me, the USB key. That's literally how governments get viruses into each other's nuclear reactors. They just distribute enough USB keys that eventually it makes its way in, as bizarre as it seems. So how do you deal with people who say, oh, the bad guys aren't after me? Like nobody cares about me. I'm this tiny little company. I have 17 employees. Like, what do you tell them?
Do people really say that?
Oh my God. Every day.
I don't know if I've ever heard that. That's you've given me so much to ponder this afternoon. But
see, it may be that you haven't heard that because by the time people engage you, they are taking it seriously. But I'm telling you, everybody who's watching this can name 6 people who've told them that this year.
Yeah. No. And all kidding aside, I think that this becomes a conversation of leverage and of understanding leverage and understanding that, kind of where just the little bit of previous conversation we just had. So if you're working with a client and their opinion is that they don't have anything, that they're not a target, then sometimes we'll go down the rabbit hole a little bit with them. Like, oh, you stayed in a hotel last night? Well, where'd you stay? Oh, I stayed at Holiday Inn. Oh, great. Well, what room were you in? Well, why does that matter? Well, you have nothing to hide. Can I have your key? Why don't we go take a look? And so by finding some emotional trigger to make that person look at it at a different level, depending on your interest in serving that business, that might be interesting, it might not. But what I believe and has been my experience is that folks either get it or they don't. And if they believe in security by anonymity, great. That works till it doesn't. And then you end up with the other side of the coin, which is leverage. And leverage comes in the form of a client who's been burned, whether it's ransomware or phishing or, God forbid, they've had some money wired someplace that maybe they didn't intend to, or leverage comes from compliance, some sort of requirement that they need to fulfill in order to maintain compliance as part of their business. The big piece is from the MSP perspective. When you sign an agreement with a client and you say you're delivering security, we may, or the MSP may know that, hey, this is managed security, but they're essentially putting a firewall on site. They configure it. And then whenever the client needs something, they maybe happen to be in it. So they apply an OS update or they make a config change, but there's no log review. There's no log aggregation. There's nothing beyond that. So the MSP sells security in this context, but what the client believes they're buying is, I've got an army at my door 24/7 guarding me. They're constantly on watch, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm really seeing a lot of MSPs undervaluing the service they provide at the edge and really taking unnecessary risk because of that exact thing. You're selling a box that's hopefully appropriately or properly configured at the edge, but the client believes they're getting absolute, Fort Knox level security. So,
right. Well, and they believe that whether they bought a $40 firewall or a $4,000 firewall.
Right.
It says firewall right on the box.
Yep. Right below Netgear. There it is. Oops, I slipped. Sorry.
So, you can name or not name any brands you want. Are you selling or installing cloud managed firewalls and routers and that sort of thing?
We are. We're protecting infrastructure in AWS and Azure. We've got virtual firewalls. I will say that we really limit our security practice at the edge to two vendors, Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks. And even our practice supporting our partners, we limit it to that. There's been a flood of SIM and SOC providers into the space, and they'll say they'll monitor all this stuff, but we know both from practice experience and just, call it time on the water, if you will. If you have a device that doesn't provide syslog or effective SNMP, it doesn't matter what you're monitoring with. The device itself won't generate good data. And if it doesn't generate good data, you really don't, you don't have any benefit. And so we're really have spent a lot of time educating clients that, like, look, you can do this, but you can't do it with us because I already know that I can't get anything off this device. And anyone who tells you they can is not being 100% transparent with you because, take, for example, Sophos. There's a lot of Sophos partners out in the wild, but Sophos uses a somewhat proprietary SNMP that really limits the ability for some of the general, maybe traditional enterprise security tools to pull data from.
So what would you say are the biggest weaknesses that MSPs have when they try to deal with security with clients?
Great question. So this one, and there'll be some guys out there and gals who scratch their head on it, but believe it or not, we still see a high amount of misconfiguration on the security gateways out there. And what I mean by that is we will see policy on an appliance, but yet not have the policy applied. So the user or the admin will have done a reasonably nice job of configuring the appliance, but yet not applied a security policy. So essentially they've got a router with a fancier name, right? Because it's literally routing. There's no deep inspection or anything on these boxes. So we see a lot of misconfiguration. We see a lot of under-resourcing. I think that culturally there's a greater awareness of security now, but I still think when it comes time to digest the financial component, that there's still some folks out there that challenge. They project that out to the client, and then the client picks up on it and decides to go smaller, and then they have things like latency, and maybe they're not getting the full throughput. And and this is a whole nother conversation, because now you've got Comcast and some of the carriers out there advertising gig speeds, but we know the level of horsepower it takes to do real threat protection at that throughput, and you're not going to get it in a $300 box off the shelf anywhere. So.
Yeah, when people think about encryption, like opening every encrypted packet, I mean, everything on Facebook is encrypted. So when you open every single packet and you want to do that faster than 300 baud, you got to have some horsepower, right? I mean, you have to have some monster processing power and memory, right? And a big cache. And again, there's people selling $300 firewalls that's just like,
it's not happening.
Couldn't possibly do what you claim you're doing.
No, there's no way. And this is the equivalent of the leadership of an organization going away to a conference and learning about all this great technology, and then coming back to their IT department and being like, okay, we need this tomorrow. And the IT guys are like, we don't have the foundation to support this, right? And now you've got end users out getting these huge amount of bandwidth, and it is not going to be effectively defended.
Well, and there are people who say, well, that thing that Comcast gives me, that I've bought gigabit, but I'm really getting 300 meg. But at any rate, that thing they gave me, it says it's got a firewall on it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right below Netgear.
So do you think that they should call that device something else, or do you think that you should not be allowed to call it a firewall?
That's an interesting question.
Or maybe we need a new name for security devices that actually can do the job in the 21st century.
Yeah, the market in that space, if you look at those boxes, you look at those appliances, and you look at the cost, and then you consider the aggregate expense of when you're buying literally hundreds of thousands of them, and what the price point they must be at, the driver dictating the quality of that appliance, security is not in the top 5 criteria of that. It's just not. Unfortunately, the consumer or the client, for the most part, doesn't have an awareness or even an understanding that, there's a reason why one says Ferrari and one says Hyundai, or, just to pick 2 manufacturers that have just different, maybe client bases. The consequence in security, though, is regardless of budget, anyone who's dealt with identity theft or some event that required them to then have to correct some record with some agency that's highly efficient, I'm being completely sarcastic there, but will understand the pain. Or if you've tried to recover from fraudulent activity and had to prove that it wasn't you versus, the quality of vendor maybe recognizing like, okay, our fraud department picked up on this. So to get back to your question, I think there's a disservice in calling those devices firewalls, because it's truly it's not providing that functionality. So it's giving people a false sense of security, which in my opinion just puts them more at risk.
Well, and you have to assume that no one's going to put a big expensive firewall in their house, right? Unless you're a nerd and you're in this business.
Yeah.
You have to assume that the CEO's home computer, where he sticks his laptop on his wireless at his house on the same network as his television, that's not secure. And he just has to accept that that's the case unless you sell him a Big Daddy firewall for his house.
I laugh because I'm it's summertime with camp schedule and kids and everything. I'm working from home today, and I'm behind enterprise grade firewall. And as I look over at my Fire TV, I know it's segmented. I know it's completely separate from the network that I'm communicating with you on. And my home here has more security than probably a huge portion of the small businesses out there. A couple reasons. One, alignment. If I'm going to expect our clients to follow a protocol, then I'm going to mirror that and live that and own that. But more so, I'm just paranoid. You can't unknow the things we know when you work in this space, and you see things and you understand things, and some of it's technical and some psychological, but it's to quote Morpheus in the Matrix, once you take the green pill, you can't go back, or the red pill, which I forget which color was which, but you know what I'm saying.
Right. Well, it is interesting because, I know several people that they install a minimum of 4 VLANs in every office, right? You got to have the IoT devices and the security cameras and the, da-da-da-da. And it's like, I'm sorry, there's like again, that low end stuff isn't going to do this. So we're almost out of time, believe it or not. But let me ask, when should an MSP contact you? What kind of project should they say, let me give Rob a call?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, complex networks, security, anything around Fortinet or Palo. We have a really strong practice around auditing those appliances, auditing their configs, helping deploy as needed, and even ongoing SIEM and SOC services. The other component that we actually just launched this week, is a advanced endpoint protection known as Deep Instinct. And the premise, there's been a flood of providers into that space. In late 2016, we kind of had a scenario play out where we, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, identified that we had to have this piece of the defense and prevention covered. So as we began evaluating vendors, I saw the next generation, I guess they call it the next generation endpoint protection, but I saw Deep Instinct even evolve beyond the players that were available at that time. And so they've now come out of stealth mode. They've made some huge inroads, and we, as part of a proof of concept for literally the last years, we've been helping them refine this product and some of the multi-tenancy, the native multi-tenancy built in, have seen some really interesting results against competitors. And to boil it all down and just keep it simple, let's just say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I know that's kind of old school. Maybe, I don't know. I grew up in rural Northern California. We like to keep it simple but effective. And so this Deep Instinct platform is actually active now, and we're really excited about the possibilities with it. So for MSPs that are looking for really the premium prevention and not having to deal with the threats that are out there, as part of a defense in depth strategy, that would be something that they should seek us out for.
All righty. Last question, and it's probably one we should have dealt with 20 minutes ago, but doesn't this add a layer of expense that is beyond most small businesses?
Maybe. And it's perspective, because you're going to pay one of two ways. You're going to pay with efficiency and downtime, potentially ransom, potentially identity theft. I mean, that list, it just continues to expand. Or, the point we just made, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you're doing things like dark web monitoring, and you've got endpoint detection or endpoint prevention, it goes by different names, and you've got a strong security policy at the edge, and you're doing your end user education, you're basically investing in the productivity of your business or your client's business versus the reactionary fire drill. And, let's be honest, when do these things happen? At the least convenient time for you and me, right? So how do you want to address it? So.
Yep. Well, now let's get back to, I know that this means you're going to have to delay buying your $3,000 tires for your car, but these are choices we make.
Yeah. I mean, you can put some bling on your wheels, or you could protect literally everything that's important to you. So,
very cool.
Priorities and perspective.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time today. And we're going to put your contact information down below so that people can get in touch with you. And I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate being on. Have a great day.
You too.